The 20th century was humanity's darkest hour. 2 world wars, the Holocaust, nuclear annihilation, hovering like a sword over civilization, traditional beliefs in God, progress, human goodness, lay shattered like glass on cobblestones. Into this void stepped a man born under the blazing sun of French Algeria, who would become one of literature's greatest voices, not by offering false comfort, but by teaching us how to live without illusions. Albert Camus didn't start life as a philosopher. He started as a poor kid who lost his father before he could walk, raised by a mother who could barely speak, let alone read. Yet from this silence, this poverty, this seeming nothingness, emerged one of the most eloquent voices in human history. Today, we are diving deep into the life of Albert Camus, from the dusty streets of Algiers to the glittering cafes of Paris, from football fields to Nobel Prize ceremonies. This is the story of how a working-class kid became the voice of existential rebellion, and how his philosophy of absurdism changed the way we think about meaning, purpose, and what it takes to live an authentic life in an indifferent universe. Our story begins in 1913 in the Belcourt district of Algiers, a working-class neighborhood where French colonists, Arab natives, and Spanish immigrants lived in a precarious mixture of tension and community. The air smelled of jasmine and exhaust fumes, of couscous and coffee, of possibility and poverty intertwined. Lucien Camus, Albert's father, was a cellar master at a local winery. Quiet, hardworking, unremarkable except for one defining moment. When World War I broke out, he enlisted. He fought in the Battle of the Marne, where a piece of shrapnel found his brain. He died in a military hospital, leaving behind a widow and 2 sons he had barely known. Catherine Sintes, Albert's mother, was Spanish by birth, French by circumstance, and nearly mute by nature. A cleaning woman who scrubbed floors for rich families. She spoke so rarely that young Albert sometimes wondered if she had forgotten how. When she did speak, it was in fragments. Eat, sleep, don't be late. Their apartment was a study in minimalism, not by choice, but by necessity. 2 rooms, no electricity, no running water. Albert and his brother Lucien slept in the same bed. Their grandmother, a tyrant with a sharp tongue and sharper opinions, ruled the household with an iron fist that left emotional bruises on everyone. But here's where Camus' story takes its first transformative turn. At school, a teacher named Louis Germain noticed something in this quiet, intense boy, a hunger for knowledge that poverty couldn't diminish. Germain didn't just teach Albert, he fought for him. Picture this scene: Catherine Camus, barely literate, sitting across from Louis Germain as he explains why her son should continue his education instead of getting a job. She listens without understanding, not without comprehending, but something in Germain's passion convinces her. Albert would later say this decision saved his life. At the Lycée, the prestigious secondary school, Albert felt like an alien studying human behavior. His classmates had books at home. He had silence. They had fathers who discussed politics. He had a mother who cleaned their fathers' offices. Yet, he excelled, driven by a fury to prove that intelligence doesn't require a trust fund. But Camus wasn't just a bookworm. He was a goalkeeper on the school football team, and not just any goalkeeper. He was fearless, diving for balls that should have broken his bones, taking hits that would have sent other boys crying to their mothers. Years later, he would say football taught him everything he needed to know about life. That sometimes you have to throw yourself at impossible situations. That teamwork matters more than individual glory. And that you can lose gracefully while still fighting with everything you have. Then, At 17, disaster struck. What started as fatigue became fever. Fever became coughing. Coughing became blood. Tuberculosis, the romantic disease that killed so many artists and intellectuals, had found Albert Camus. In 1930, a TB diagnosis was often a death sentence, especially for poor kids who couldn't afford sanatoriums in Switzerland. For months, Albert lay in bed, watching dust moths dance in afternoon sunlight, listening to his mother's quiet footsteps, feeling death hover like a patient vulture. This wasn't dramatic or poetic. It was tedious, frightening, and utterly indifferent to his plans and dreams. It was, though he did not write it yet, his first real encounter with the word absurd. When Albert finally recovered, scarred but alive, he entered the University of Algiers with the intensity of someone who had glimpsed his own mortality. The tuberculosis had taken his childhood illusions about permanent security, but it had given him something more valuable, the knowledge that life is both precious and precarious. Enter Jean Granier, professor of philosophy, mentor, and the intellectual father Albert never had. Granier was everything Albert wasn't: bourgeois, cultured, well-traveled, but he saw in this intense young man a mind capable of greatness. Their relationship would last for decades, built on mutual respect and genuine affection. Under Granier's guidance, Albert discovered Nietzsche, who declared God dead and asked what comes next. He found Dostoevsky, who explored the psychology of guilt and redemption. He encountered the ancient Greeks, who faced tragedy with dignity rather than despair. Each book was like discovering a new country in the landscape of human thought. In 1934, Albert married Simone, a beautiful, intelligent woman with one terrible flaw. She was addicted to morphine. The marriage was a disaster from the start. Picture this: a young husband coming home to find his wife in a drug-induced stupor, needles hidden in jewelry boxes, lies stacked on lies like unstable architecture. The marriage lasted 2 years, 2 years that taught Albert about love's capacity for both salvation and destruction. The divorce was inevitable, but it left scars. Years later, he would write about the terrible loneliness of loving someone who is slowly disappearing before your eyes. Like many intellectuals of his generation, Albert briefly joined the Communist Party. The year was 1935, and fascism was rising across Europe. Communism seemed like the only force strong enough to resist, but Albert's membership was complicated. He believed in justice for Arab workers, while the party line focused primarily on European concerns. This is where another crucial chapter begins. Albert founded a theatre company called the Théâtre du Travail, the Workers' Theatre. Not just any theatre, but one committed to bringing serious drama to working-class audiences. They performed in community centers, union halls, anywhere people gathered who couldn't afford orchestral seats. As a director, Albert was demanding, passionate, sometimes impossible. He wanted every performance to matter, every line to carry the weight of truth. His actors later said he could make them believe in characters they had never thought they could portray. Theater, for Camus, wasn't entertainment. It was a form of spiritual communion. But Albert needed money, and theater doesn't pay the bills. So he became a journalist working for a progressive newspaper called Alger Républicain. This wasn't just a job. It was his first real platform to fight injustice. He covered poverty in the Kabylia region, exposing how colonial policies created starvation among Arab populations. His reporting was fearless and furious. He described colonial administrators living in luxury while Arab children died of preventable diseases. He documented how French justice worked differently for Arabs and Europeans. These articles made him enemies in the colonial government, and they made him a target. Then came 1940, and the world split open like rotten fruit. Nazi Germany conquered France in 6 weeks, and suddenly, everything Albert thought he knew about civilization proved to be tissue paper in a hurricane. The colonial government, now aligned with Vichy France, made it clear journalists who criticized authority would face consequences. So Albert did what intellectuals throughout history have done when their governments turned fascist. He ran. Not to safety. There was no safety anywhere in 1940, but to the heart of the occupied zone, to Paris, where at least the enemy was honest about being the enemy. In Paris, Albert found work at Paris Soir, a newspaper that had made neutered by censorship. Every article had to pass through German censors. Every opinion had to support the occupation. For a man who had built his identity on speaking truth to power, this was spiritual suffocation. But it was during these dark months that Albert began writing what would become his masterpiece, The Stranger. Picture him in his tiny apartment, cigarette smoke curling toward the ceiling, crafting the story of Mersault, a man who kills a stranger on a beach and faces execution not for the crime, but for refusing to pretend he feels appropriate emotions. The opening line, "Mother died today," came to him fully formed as if dictated by some invisible oracle. From there, the story poured out in a style that was completely new. Spare, direct, almost cruel in its honesty. No psychological explanations, no moral judgment, just the brutal facts of what happened. In 1940, Albert married Francine Fauré, a mathematician and pianist from a respectable Algerian family. Unlike his first marriage, this was built on genuine compatibility and mutual respect. Francine was intelligent, stable, and deeply committed to Albert's work. She would become his anchor during the storms ahead. When his tuberculosis flared up again, Albert and Francine returned to Algeria. He spent months recovering in the mountain village of Lopanelia, where the thin air was supposed to heal his lungs. Instead of just recovering, he wrote, "The isolation and proximity to death sharpened his thinking about what it means to be human in an indifferent universe." It was here, surrounded by ancient mountains that had witnessed countless human civilizations rise and fall, that Albert fully developed his philosophy of the absurd. The concept was elegantly simple and terrifyingly complex. Life has no inherent meaning, yet we desperately need meaning to function. This gap between human need and cosmic silence is the absurd condition. He found his metaphor in Sisyphus, the king from Greek mythology, condemned to push a boulder up a mountain for eternity, only to watch it roll back down each time he reached the summit. For Camus, Sisyphus became the perfect image of human existence. Endless, apparently meaningless efforts in the face of inevitable failure. But Albert wasn't content to just philosophize while the world burned. In 1943, he joined the French resistance, working with a network called Combat. This wasn't the romanticized resistance of Hollywood movies. It was ordinary people doing extraordinary things, forging documents, hiding weapons, spreading information, knowing that capture meant torture and death. Albert became editor of Combat's underground newspaper, writing articles that had to be smuggled past Nazi patrols and distributed by hand. Every issue was an act of rebellion, every word a small victory against tyranny. He wrote under pseudonyms never knowing if this article would be his last. When Paris was finally liberated in August 1944, Albert was there as Combat became a legal newspaper. The boy from the Belcourt slums was now one of France's most respected journalists. His articles read by intellectuals and workers alike. But victory brought new moral complexities. Then came Hiroshima. While most of the world celebrated the end of World War II, Albert wrote an editorial that stunned readers. He argued that humanity had crossed a moral line from which there might be no return. Nuclear weapons, he said, had made the future of human civilization a question rather than an assumption. In 1942, The Stranger was published, and French literature was never the same. The novel seemed simple on the surface. The story of Meursault, a man who kills an Arab on a beach and shows no remorse, but readers sensed something revolutionary in its pages, even if they couldn't quite articulate what. The murder scene, where Meursault shoots a man because the sun was too bright, because he was hot and uncomfortable, because life suddenly seemed unbearable, captured something essential about human nature that had never been expressed so directly. We all have moments when civilization feels like a costume we're tired of wearing. But the real genius of the novel wasn't the crime, it was the trial. Meursault is condemned not for murder, but for refusing to play society's emotional games. He didn't cry at his mother's funeral, doesn't pretend to feel guilt he doesn't experience, won't mouth the platitudes expected of a reformed criminal. His honesty becomes a capital offense. In the final pages, facing execution, Meursault achieved a kind of enlightenment. He realizes that the universe doesn't care about the human consent and finds this liberating rather than crushing. If nothing matters cosmically, then everything matters personally. It's a paradox that defines absurdist philosophy. The same year, Albert published The Myth of Sisyphus, the philosophical companion to The Stranger, where he laid out his arguments clearly. The only truly serious philosophical problem is suicide. If life has no inherent meaning, why continue living? His answer was revolutionary. He should live precisely because life is meaningless. The essay's famous conclusion imagines Sisyphus walking back down the mountain to retrieve his boulder. In that moment of respite, Camus argues, Sisyphus is superior to his fate. He knows his task is pointless, yet he chooses to continue. The struggle itself toward the height is enough to fill a man's heart. Albert wrote, one must imagine Sisyphus happy. These two works made Albert Camus the voice of his generation. Young people, especially, resonated with his message. If the world doesn't make sense, at least we can face that fact honestly. If there's no God to give life meaning, we can create our own meaning through our choices. In post-war Paris, Albert found himself part of an intellectual constellation that included Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir. They were all grappling with similar questions about existence and authenticity, but their answers differed in crucial ways. While Sartre emphasized radical freedom and political engagement, Camus stressed limits and individual responsibility. The Stranger became an international phenomenon, translated into dozens of languages, read by millions who recognized something of themselves in Meursault's alienation. It was the right book at the right time, when traditional certainties had been shattered and people needed a new way to think about being human. In 1947, Albert published his second novel, The Plague. And if The Stranger was about individual alienation, The Plague was about collective response to cosmic indifference. Set in the Algerian city of Oran, it tells the story of a town sealed off from the world, when bubonic plague returns like an unwelcomed ghost from medieval times. The novel opens with rats dying in the streets, thousands of them, emerging from sewers and cellars to die in full view of horrified citizens. It's a brilliant metaphor for how catastrophe announces itself. First, as isolated incidents we prefer to ignore, then as undeniable crisis that transforms everything. Dr. Rieu, the novel's protagonist, is Albert's answer to Meursault. Where Meursault was passive and detached, Rieu is engaged and compassionate. He fights the plague not because he believes he will win, but because fighting is what makes us human. It's Sisyphus with a medical degree. When the city is sealed off, no one in, no one out, Oran becomes a laboratory for human behavior under extreme stress. Some people retreat into denial, others profiteer from suffering. A few discover heroism they never knew they possessed. The plague strips away social pretenses, revealing who people really are when everything familiar disappears. Albert's description of how a society responds to mass death was particularly powerful for readers who had lived through World War II. The bureaucratic inefficiency, the initial denial, the gradual acceptance of horror as routine. It all felt terrifyingly familiar to people who had watched entire populations disappear. But the plague isn't ultimately pessimistic. Through characters like Dr. Rieu, the journalist Rambert, and the mysterious Tarot, Albert shows how catastrophe can awaken solidarity. When cosmic forces threaten to crush human dignity, people can choose to support each other rather than surrender to despair. The novel's most powerful character might be Father Panelot, a priest whose faith is tested by the plague's senseless cruelty. His sermons evolve from claiming plague is divine punishment to acknowledging that sometimes faith means accepting incomprehensible suffering. It is Albert's most sympathetic portrayal of religious belief. When the plague finally ends, not through human triumph, but through natural cycles beyond our control, the city celebrates. But Dr. Rieu knows the plague bacillus never dies, only sleeps. Evil and suffering are permanent features of existence. The only choice is how we respond when they inevitably return. The plague cemented Albert's reputation as more than just a novelist. He was now recognized as a moral philosopher whose fiction grappled with the deepest questions of existence. The book won France Prix de Critique and was translated worldwide, establishing him as one of literature's essential voices. The 1950s brought new challenges as the Cold War divided intellectuals into camps. Albert found himself increasingly isolated from former allies like Sartre, who supported communist movements despite their authoritarian excesses. When Soviet tanks crushed the Hungarian Revolution in 1956, Albert's anti-totalitarian stance put him at odds with much of the French left. But the issue that truly tormented Albert was Algeria, his homeland, now torn apart by a brutal war for independence. His position was complex and ultimately tragic. He supported Arab rights and opposed colonial oppression, but couldn't bring himself to support the FLN's terrorist tactics, especially when they targeted civilians. When bombs exploded in Algiers cafes, killing French and Arab civilians alike, Albert felt the weight of personal tragedy. These weren't statistics. These were neighborhoods he had grown up in, people he might have known. His famous statement, "I believe in justice, but I will defend my mother before justice," captured his impossible position. At a Stockholm University in 1957, an Algerian student confronted Albert, accusing him of supporting colonialism. Albert's response was emotional and revealing. He spoke of bombs that could have killed his mother, still living in Algiers. It was a moment that showed how abstract political principles collide with personal loyalties. That same year, Albert received the Nobel Prize in Literature at 44, the second youngest recipient in history. The Swedish Academy cited his work as illuminating the problems of the human conscience in our time. For a boy from the slums of Belcourt, it represented the ultimate vindication. His acceptance speech was characteristically thoughtful. He spoke about art's responsibility to serve freedom and human dignity, about the writer's obligation to understand rather than judge. But privately, he felt burdened by the honor, wondering if he deserved recognition that had been denied to greater writers. The Nobel Prize also made him a target. Critics attacked him as a morally compromised intellectual who had abandoned his political principles for literary fame. Former friends like Sartre publicly questioned whether Albert deserved the honor, deepening his sense of isolation from the Parisian intellectual establishment. In his final years, Albert retreated from Paris to a house in Lourmarin, a village in Provence where the light reminded him of Algeria. He was working on what many considered his finest novel, The First Man, an autobiographical work about returning to his childhood neighborhood to understand his origins. The First Man was Albert's attempt to reconcile with his past, to understand how a boy from poverty became an international literary figure, to explore the colonial world that shaped him, to capture his mother's love despite her silence. It was his most personal work, written with the wisdom of middle age but the emotional intensity of youth. His personal life had found stability. Francine had given him twins, Catherine and Jean. And despite his earlier affairs and her struggles with depression, their marriage had deepened into genuine partnership. He was learning to balance his public persona with private happiness. He would also return to his first love, theater. His adaptations of work by Dostoevsky and others were acclaimed, and he was planning new productions. Theater remained his purest joy, collaborative, immediate, connecting with audiences in ways that solitary writings couldn't match. January 4, 1960. A rainy day in rural France, Albert was returning to Paris with his publisher Michael Guillemard and Guillemard's family. In his briefcase was the manuscript of The First Man, 144 pages of handwritten text that represented his most ambitious work yet. At 1:55 p.m., on a straight stretch of road near the village of Libreville, Michel Guillemard lost control of his Faisal Vega. The car hit a tree at high speed. Guillemard died several days later from his injuries. Albert Camus died instantly. He was 46 years old. The literary world was stunned. Sartre, despite their political differences, wrote a moving tribute. He represented in our time the admirable conjunction of a person, an action, and a work. Writers across the globe mourned the loss of a voice that had helped define what it meant to be human in the modern age. He was buried in Lourmarin, far from the elaborate tombs of literary giants in Paris-Lachaise. The headstone is simple, bearing just his name and dates. It's exactly what he would have wanted. No grand statements, no philosophical summaries, just acknowledgement that Albert Camus was here, and now he is not. The First Man was published decades later, unfinished but powerful, a meditation on memory, identity, and the landscapes that shape us. Reading it feels like listening to Albert speak from beyond the grave about the mysteries that drove his entire career. Who are we? Why are we here? And how should we live? Albert Camus died believing he was a failure, that his greatest work was behind him, that he had compromised his principles, that history would forget him. He couldn't have been more wrong. Today, his books are read by millions. The Stranger remains one of the most assigned novels in universities worldwide. His philosophy of the absurd has influenced everyone from rock musicians to software engineers to therapists, helping people cope with meaninglessness. His political insights about the dangers of ideological purity, about choosing humanity over abstract principles, feel prophetic in our age of polarization. His refusal to sacrifice individuals for causes resonates with everyone who has watched movements devour their own children. But perhaps his greatest legacy is simpler. He taught us that we can acknowledge life's essential meaninglessness without surrendering to despair. That we can live with passion and purpose, even especially when the universe offers no guarantees. In our age of anxiety, of climate crisis, of technological disruptions, of democratic backsliding, Albert Camus offers something precious, not false comfort, but honest hope. Not easy answers, but the right questions. Not certainty, but the courage to live without it. Somewhere in Algiers, the sun still rises over the Belcourt district, where a poor boy once dreamed of a different life. The cafe is still filled with cigarette smokes and passionate arguments. Young people still read The Stranger and recognize themselves in Marcel's alienation. And the absurd goes on, which is to say, life goes on, in all its terrible beauty and beautiful terror. The boulder rolls back down the mountain. Sisyphus walks down to meet it, and somewhere in that moment of choice to continue or surrender lies everything that makes us human.